listeners. I'm Nathaniel Bozarth, and this is Wide Ruled. In this and several other episodes this season, you're going to hear me sort of exploring my experience in high school with classmates. My high school, Olathe North, was unique compared to many other high schools in the Kansas City suburbs. Compared to neighboring suburban high schools, it's more socioeconomically and racially diverse. And I feel like my experiences there set the stage for much of my interest and investment in racial justice and equitable opportunity. And for the purpose of Wide Ruled, I think Olathe North sets a meaningful backdrop for many conversations around justice and education. So I hope you won't mind us spending some time there. In this episode, I'm going to drop us right into the midst of my conversation with Stephanie Alderman-Oler and Lucas Vincent. I'll introduce them to you now, then give you a little background on Olathe North before you hear from them. Lucas Vincent currently teaches emotional and behavioral disability special ed at Olathe West, where he's been for 4 years. Lucas was previously a long-term sub in the Shawnee Mission District and a para in the Blue Valley District, both also Kansas City suburban school districts on the Kansas side. Lucas is the girls wrestling coach at Olathe West. Stephanie is in her 10th year teaching. She spent her first 2 years teaching at Olathe North, followed by 8 years in Kansas City, Kansas, where she still teaches. She taught high school science for 8 years and is in her 2nd year teaching middle school science. Before you hear from Stephanie and Lucas, you'll need a bit of background about Olathe North High School. Olathe North was a pilot location for Olathe's 21st Century programs back in 2003. According to the Olathe School District website, the 21st Century programs, now called Academies, quote, allow students to build upon their interests and learn specific knowledge and skills they can apply towards their post-secondary experiences and career fields, end quote. Functionally, these programs also served as sort of magnet programs, allowing students outside the school's boundaries to transfer for the program. So where are the school's boundaries? Well, when you look at the middle schools that immediately feed into North, that are geographically closest, they have more lower income, economically disadvantaged students than North itself. For instance, 2 of the main Olathe North feeder schools serve 46% and 57% economically disadvantaged students, according to the Kansas Department of Education. Though, based on school boundaries, these schools should make up the bulk of the Olathe North student body. KSDE reports that only 40% of Olathe North students are economically disadvantaged. So Olathe North, 40% economically disadvantaged students compared to the feeder schools, 46 and 57%. So that means that the 21st Century programs, at least in part, help to infuse socioeconomic diversity into Olathe North. But, as you'll soon hear, that's not the whole story. I want to kind of like double click on the socioeconomic integration. Like what's the purpose? What's the benefit for poorer students? And I can think of benefits in my own life to being around people that came from a higher SES than me. But I'm curious to hear the two of you kind of reflect on that. From North, like what's the benefit for students?
You really just kind of get, experiences that you never get to have. We weren't struggling by any means, but we were on that, that lower end of the socioeconomic scale. And so, having friends who lived in those rich neighborhoods and had all these nice things, it was really cool to kind of be able to go over to their house and kind of see how they live, see the things that they had, and see things that at home, it's not something that you would get to see or get to experience.
Broadly speaking, there is research that shows that having a more diverse socioeconomic diversity in a classroom improves test scores for students across the board, but especially for low SES students, improves test scores. And I know that there's research that specifically has documented that. I will then add my own perspective that I would say a fair amount of what that comes from is teacher expectations and school expectations in general. So you talked about the experience of being more like being around like in an area that is with expertise around going to college and post and navigating standardized tests and entrance exams and things like that. That is approached very differently in schools that are higher socioeconomic status than it is in the experiences that I've had in schools that are more lower socioeconomic status, that the approach to how you even have those conversations or make those resources available is different. So I would venture that impacts those results of that research that says we know that socioeconomic diversity in classrooms improves test scores. I would venture that some of that is really based in expectations. And
wow. So in classes or in schools with a more concentrated low SES student base, like do you see that is that where the low expectations come in that are hurting student outcomes?
I think yes. I think sometimes yes, and I think also just the different supports. There's a lot of the other like research that I think I don't know if there's been research that connects these pieces, but the other research there's a lot of research about just teacher expectations and how teacher expectations have such an impact on student success. There's a really, and I can't think of like the authors' names on it, but there's a really like regularly quoted study that talks about how in a school they just like called one class an honors class to the teachers. They told the teacher, you have the honors class, you have the really, really like smart kids. And wow. In another class, like you've got the regular class, but it was just randomized. It wasn't intentionally based, and the test scores were significantly different in those two settings because teacher expectations have such an impact on what's happened, like what students have access to even.
And that's going to be huge working with students with disabilities too, because it seems to me like there's, I'll go out on a limb, like there's such societal, it seems like there's a broad societal belief that like, if you have a kid with disabilities, what happens? Like, can they contribute to society? So there's like an even greater threat of low expectations, or I don't know, maybe not even greater, a strong threat of low expectations.
You know what I've learned working with the population of students that I do is if you treat them like that, you're not going to get anything out of them. All these kids they want to be treated like a person.
Yeah.
That's all it is. You give them the respect that, you give an everyday person, and they will do anything for you. It just kind of, a lot of teachers don't understand how big of a role that they play in the classroom with these students.
Wow.
I think so much. Like, I think like in the broad picture and with subgroups of students that there can be like that there often is already a bias with. So like our students with special needs, like special education needs and things, the teacher role absolutely, like I just want to keep echoing this, like has such an impact on what students even have access to. TNTP, I don't know what that stands for. It's an organization, but they put out a report a couple of years ago called the Opportunity Myth. And it was a relatively small study. They did, I think, like 5 high schools. So there is some limitation to it, but they, in the work that they did, really identified 4 big things that they were really focused on how students can possibly leave high school with a high school degree or high school diploma and not be ready to be successful as freshmen in college. They really identified 4 main issues and 4 main recommendations. So they said that the biggest thing that students miss out on are grade appropriate assignments that are like at the level of and rigor of the standard that is supposed to be taught at that grade level. Strong instruction, so teachers that are well trained and well prepared and have strong instructional practices. Deep engagement, so making like education really meaningful, and then teachers who hold high expectations. Those 4 things, and all 4 of those are very much in the control of a teacher. Those 4 things were the biggest contributors that they found to students not being prepared. It was not their home life. It was not their socioeconomic status. Like it was not their, whether or not their parents came to parent-teacher conferences. Like those were the recommendations that came from it as the biggest pieces to what creates the opportunity gap that we talk about so often. That often in education we put a lot of it. Like that opportunity gap exists across socioeconomic. It is a gap between low SES and high SES, and but that it is based, according to this study, not attributed to socioeconomic status itself or the home environment. That is where socioeconomic status is measured by. So much is in control of schools.
And what was the Y variable that they were trying to predict was success in first year college?
So how they were looking into how students leave high school not prepared for college.
Wow.
Or prepared for their goals. So the report goes in a little bit about how a big thing is not, if you don't even talk to students about what their goals are, like then all of your assumptions, all of those assumptions are a big piece of it. So there were some of the like qualitative interview pieces they did were very centered around students who felt like no one knew that they had career goals they wanted to pursue. So the classes they were enrolled in and the work they were doing didn't feel meaningful. So there wasn't the deep engagement. So like these things layer on top of each other. If you aren't having high expectations, you're missing out on the meaningfulness and the deep engagement.
Wow. Well, that's really fascinating. I think what also sticks out to me in the age of like STEM and STEAM and maker spaces, like those things didn't factor in there, like access, like all these extra inputs that millions and millions of dollars get put into, and we like they could be meaningful in other ways, but when predicting that,
and those are pieces that money is put into it with the goal of increasing the engagement piece of it. But if you're not increasing the engagement at grade level appropriate levels, at rigorous levels, and with meaningful purpose behind it, then you lose out on that engagement. So then it becomes a lot of money spent on things that aren't effective in the way you want. And as a science teacher, that's a big deal. A lot of money goes into STEM education and science education right now, but if it's not used well, if it's used just through the lens of being engaging and making it fun, then you miss out on leveraging it into being grade level appropriate and meaningful, and then you lose the engagement that you were seeking.
Wow. Man. Well, I want to bring it back to North. I think I'm just curious, like I had such a great, I think so much about North and feel like it was so influential in my life. I'm curious, like how, can you, is there a way that North did or did not kind of shape you and who you are today? It's a big, broad question.
I think Olathe North really set me up with a lot of opportunities. I remember coming in to district office for my interview with HR to get hired at West for the first time, and the guy interviewing me is like, "Hey, I remember you. You played football at Olathe North," and I just felt like Olathe North was, a really big part of my life. It really helped me get to where I am. It's a lot of lifelong friendships that I formed there. A lot of people that I, never be able to replace in my life, and it was just a really good experience growing up there in the time that we did.
Yeah.
I would also say, like, I think Olathe North was a really positive experience for me. I had opportunities I wouldn't have had anywhere else, and they definitely shaped the path I was on. Some of the extracurriculars that I was involved in, I was involved in the Faraday Society, which is an extracurricular that exists literally nowhere else, and is a science communication club, essentially, and go out and do science communication pieces, but was very foundational to where I've ended up in my life and career. And a lot of the opportunities I had through Distinguished Scholars and through the honors classes I was in and through all the extracurriculars I was involved in a lot of extracurriculars. Very influential, very positive experience. I think that's what made it so hard when I went back as a teacher and an adult and could see it from the perspective outside of being in those opportunities, and realizing how Olathe North has all of these really fantastic things going on, but it is not reaching the students that it is, whose homeschool it is, that those resources don't reach the students who, for lack of a better word, belong at Olathe North. It is their homeschool. It is their
neighborhood.
Yeah. It is their neighborhood. It's their community. It's their public education, and those students are, from my perspective, not receiving those same resources. Then a lot of really high quality resources go into those specialty programs, not into the general classrooms. There are resources. I don't want it to sound like they're sitting in a room with nothing. Like, there are resources, but a lot of those above and beyond resources, I feel like, don't reach the students who it is their neighborhood school, and the students who need to be, like, who could be given broader opportunities and close some of those achievement gaps. I feel like
wow,
there's a missed opportunity there.
So even if there's a success in a program of kind of bringing in a broader student base from different neighborhoods and different SES, different demographics, that sometimes it's at the expense of the kids who may need those opportunities and who are closest to the school.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I never thought of it like that.
And it is a perspective I didn't see till I was there teaching in the gen ed classes, and feeling like there was an amount of students getting pushed through the system or passed through the system that would never happen if they were involved in one of those specialty programs, and really seeing as a teacher that the highest quality teachers were very quickly pulled out of the gen ed classes and pulled into specialty classes. So you're pulling expertise and resource away from students who probably really would benefit a lot from expertise and resource. I don't know if, Lucas, if you have any more insight into that at Olathe West.
A lot of our teachers, they'll teach honors classes as well as gen ed classes. So it's not a complete pull out. So, I know a couple of our teachers, he'll teach, a couple high level math classes, like junior, senior math, whatever those are. They're too smart for me. I'm terrible at math. And then, he'll teach, college algebra. So it's not like at West we pull out the good teachers. I think we have fantastic teachers across the board. The best group of individuals that I've had the pleasure of working with. Everybody loves kids. They love their job. And, we have good teachers there, and, Mr. Novacek really knows how to utilize them.
in my experience and perspective of that, it is possible it was just in my particular department. I don't know if that's because the Olathe schools are so big that it's pretty, each department functions very independently, or at least at Olathe North it did. And so I don't know if that same philosophy fell into other departments, but I do know like even I do know that like I felt pressure that if I wanted to be respected on a career path as a teacher, that I should be teaching honors or AP or specialty classes. But my passion was for the gen ed classes. My passion was for physical science, which is in Olathe, like a class that is mostly offered to students that have been identified as maybe will struggle for a variety of reasons, some of it behaviorally. And for our like sped classes, those were areas that I was really interested in stepping into or staying in. And there was a lot of pressure to add on sections of honors or step into preparing to be able to teach a college now class. And it felt, at least at that time, I was a very early career teacher, so that also is part of that perspective. But at least at the time, it felt that the respect was different if you taught, if you were on a path to teach the honors classes or the specialty classes compared to if you were teaching the general classes.
Like a feather in your cap. That's interesting.
I think that just goes along with that those positions are very hard to find. And if we can find somebody here that can fill that gap, it saves a lot of time, you know, setting up interviews, doing all the paperwork, just bring somebody up compared to bringing somebody in who may or may not be a good classroom teacher, but would have the content knowledge. That's just kind of my perspective on that.
Well, I mean, kind of going back to what it means for the students. So there's a teacher culture thing that I'm hearing. There's, I mean, it's a professional culture. Like there's high levels of hierarchy and like peer pressure and whatever industry you're in, that may have pros and cons to it, and multiple reasons. But something that I'm hearing, kind of going back to what you were saying, Stephanie, about the kind of your experience, what you observed, at least in your department, it goes back to what you were saying about expectations, and one of the studies you cited that talked about like in that random trial where you randomly assign students to an honors class, tell the teacher it's an honor class, their expectations were higher. So if you're in a school where you have essentially a magnet program where there's students who are coming in from out of the school's neighborhood boundary lines for a special program, it seems like we almost have to, educators have to be on guard against having expectations for those students that they wouldn't have for the other students. Like it sort of creates that, I don't know if the word is natural, like automatic is the word that kind of comes to mind, that automatic bias that we have to sort of fight against in a way.
I think, yes, I think one thing that I want to add to this about my experience around being a general science teacher as opposed to an honors science teacher at the time I was there, is that like when you have separated the teachers out so much, it creates a system where like students internalize that bias or that experience. So I taught a sophomore level class. So my freshmen all came from just 2 biology teachers because I had general classes. So there were only 2 general biology teachers. So they came from very specific, fed directly in from those teachers. And I, in my first 9 weeks there, had a significant number of students with D's and F's in my class. And I was struggling with that, but I had a lot of supports in place for students to, like, I've from the beginning of my career been a strong believer in allowing students to do late work without penalty, and to redo tests and to do alternative assessments, and have a lot of opportunities to make sure that grades are a reflection of student knowledge and not just a reflection of student compliance. But I had these excessive numbers of D's and F's that were rooted in a lot of missing work from students. And at the midterm point of my first quarter, it was just after the midterm point, so it was about 6 weeks into teaching at Olathe North, somebody that I very much respected, that was a part of the building leadership team, which is teachers primarily. Somebody that I very much respected, part of the building leadership team, came to me in an attempt to be proactive and protective, came to me and asked me to really think as a teacher about what the difference was between an F and a D and a C, and whether it was worth risking, I don't even know risking what, but whether or not it was really worth pushing for the students to have an F if they had that many zeros, or have a D if that's what they had earned. Because my name had already come up several times in the building leadership team meetings as a potential concern. And this was the first time I had heard anything about this. And
as a potential concern because you had students that
had D's and F's, because I had too many students with D's and F's.
That it was a reflection on you as a teacher, is what their read was.
Yes, and that I should really think about whether, and the response and the advice that was being presented to me was that I should just bump grades up. Wow. I turned around and went, I was very, very upset by this. So the next day I asked for some time with my principal, and I went and talked to my principal about, I went in with the letter that I gave students at the beginning of the year with all the ways that they can improve their grades and all the supports that exist. And my principal said, it looks like you have all the right things in place, so we're okay. But that no one had asked for those pieces. My peers who were leaders in the building were instead, it felt like, talking very much behind my back about that concern, and that the response was that I should just fix it, not by supporting students and bringing them up, but by just passing them along. What I came to understand is that my students were they did not believe that I was going to leave if they didn't turn in work, they did not believe I would leave a D or an F on a report card, because they had come from a classroom the year before, their science teacher the year before. I don't think she gave anyone below a B for the whole year.
Wow.
And so they did not believe that those grades would stand. So as we got to the end of the semester, when grades were really real, we'd made it through quarter, got to the end of the semester, it wasn't a problem anymore. I had very few students fail at semester when it mattered. But because there had been a learned sense of what the expectations were for them in the building from the because that it was, and that is where it felt like the really skilled teachers were so often pulled out of the spaces they probably needed to be. I feel like the general biology, general chemistry was often left to less skilled teachers who would not have the high expectations that students needed in those general education classes, because the high expectations only really came through in the honors classes.
Wow. Lucas, I'm curious if you have a take or a response.
I do know I had a personal experience of kind of grade passing along at North. It was my senior year, And like I stated earlier, math is not my jam at all. So first, I think it was third quarter. Third quarter, I had a teacher who just so happened to be a KU alumni. I was committed to Mizzou. He was not a big fan of that.
And you're here with two K-Staters right now.
It's all respect for K-State. I respect K-State.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it.
But was just not doing well in the class. I think for first semester, I ended up getting an F. I ended up switching math teachers to another teacher in the school, and ended up getting an A for the semester. We'll just say there were a lot of Sudoku puzzles there. I'll let you guys kind of fill that one in.
Well, you turned out fine. That's for sure.
I still can't do math. All the other subjects, good, but math, no, not so much.
I think that kind of experience, like that sticks with you. Like I like, if you can pinpoint, like this is a point where like I got passed through and now there's a missing skill, like sticks with you. Because I had a math class my senior year that I got passed through. I was on the high end like honors track for classes, including math, but math was the class I struggled with the most and was least engaged in. I didn't really understand the purpose of math. I didn't really understand why I should care or do it. I could solve, like in classes up to that point, I could solve things, but I couldn't necessarily explain to you how I did it. Mm-hmm. So then I hit calculus, and it got really, really tough. And in calculus, it was a college now class. So you got to certain points where you were supposed to pass a JUCO test to keep continuing the class. And I had been very checked out. Like I will own that. That was on me. I was very checked out from the class, but I got to a point where I could not pass the gateway test, and where I was very, very checked out from the class. And looking back as an educator now, as a teacher, like I don't know how that teacher did not ever contact my parents and say, your child is skipping my class and sleeping in my class. Like those things were what was happening. I was very checked out. But instead I got a C in that class. I never passed the gateway test and still got a C in that class. And I then went to college as a science major and had to take science classes that expected you to know calculus. And I had a passing calculus Johnson County Community College score on my transcript. And so I ended up in classes where I could not be successful because I didn't have the skills, but like I thought that I should have them because I had passed that class. So I'm just feeding off that like sentiment of like you get passed through that class through at a point, and you can pinpoint that spot where now you're missing a skill. Like you're missing a piece that when you walk out of with that diploma you thought you had or should have. Like I don't know.
Magnet programs have long been used to try to integrate schools, to try to lure students from one school to another. They didn't especially work in the integration era after the Brown v. Board decision in 1954, but they do seem to be working in the Olathe School District in some ways. And don't get me wrong, like in the case of the Olathe schools, magnet programs, the 21st Century Academies are excellent at providing real-world learning opportunities. But it's really interesting to look at how they also divide students inside a school. Thank you so much for listening to Wide Ruled Season 2. You can follow Stephanie on Twitter at ms_hyphenated. And Lucas would love for you to come out to Olathe West and watch the girls' wrestling team. If you like the show, please share it with a friend. You can support the show financially through Patreon at patreon.com/wideruledpodcast. Pledge as little as $1 an episode. Wide Ruled's new theme music was produced by Dominique Fields. I think it sounds so good. Don't you? Thanks, everyone.